The scent of freshly cut grass always reminded me of home, of safety. Our house, a modest but comfortable split level in a quiet suburb just outside Minneapolis, felt like a sanctuary. Mark and I had bought it 3 years ago, a year after we got married. We'd dated for 4 years before that, a slow, steady build of a relationship that felt less like a whirlwind romance and more like two compatible people building a life together, brick by brick. He was stable, kind, worked as an accountant. I was a graphic designer, working mostly from a sunroom that overlooked our small, tidy backyard. Life felt good. Predictable, maybe, but good. That predictability shattered the day Ethan showed up. Ethan Miller was my stepbrother. Not in the way you usually think. We weren't kids who grew up together under one roof. My dad, Robert Miller, remarried Susan when I was 18. Susan had Ethan, who was a couple of years older than me, from her first marriage. We saw each other at holidays, family dinners. It was cordial, polite. Ethan was different. He drifted through life, always chasing some vague idea, never holding down a job for long. Susan, his mother, was fiercely protective, while my dad, Robert, seemed perpetually exasperated by him. Ethan called out of the blue one Tuesday afternoon. He'd lost his latest job, something vaguely artistic in Denver, and needed a place to crash. He was planning to explore opportunities in the Twin Cities area. My heart sank. I wasn't thrilled about having Ethan stay with us. He wasn't malicious, just chaotic. He left messes, stayed up late, borrowed money he never repaid. But he was family, technically. I looked at Mark. He was neutral. "It's your family, Clara," he'd said, ever the pragmatist. "If your dad and Susan are okay with it, I guess it's fine." My dad called later that evening. He sounded tired. "Clara," he sighed, "Ethan needs a place. Just for a few weeks, he says. Susan thinks it would be good for him to have some structure. You know, see how normal people live." The implication hung heavy in the air. We were the normal ones. Ethan wasn't. "Could he stay with you guys? Just until he finds his feet?" How do you say no to your father, even when he's asking you to take on his adult stepson's responsibility? I couldn't. I agreed, the familiar knot of familial obligation tightening in my stomach. Ethan arrived the following weekend, carrying 2 duffel bags that looked like they'd seen better days and a guitar case covered in stickers. He was tall, lanky, with a mop of brown hair and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual, slightly bewildered look. He thanked us profusely, promised to be no trouble. We set him up in the spare bedroom. For the first few days, it was manageable. Ethan was mostly gone during the day, supposedly job hunting or exploring. He'd be back late, sometimes after we were already in bed. He was quiet enough, and he even offered to help with chores once or twice. I started to relax, thinking maybe my initial fears were unfounded. Maybe he was finally trying to get his act together. Then, subtle things started to shift. Mark, usually home by 6 p.m., began working late more often. He said it was a big project at the firm. He seemed more distracted too, less engaged when I talked about my day. Ethan was around more during the day, not going out as much. He said the job market was tough, and he was trying to save money on gas. It made sense, but something felt off. I'd come downstairs for coffee and find Ethan sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling on his phone, sometimes with a cup of coffee. Mark must have made for him. They'd share a look, a quick, almost imperceptible exchange before turning to me with polite smiles. Once I came home unexpectedly early from a client meeting, maybe 3 p.m. instead of 5 p.m. Mark's car was in the driveway, which was unusual. The front door was unlocked. I walked in and heard hushed voices from the living room. I paused, then called out, "Hello? Mark? Ethan?" Silence. Then Mark appeared, looking slightly flustered. "Clara? You're home early." "Yeah, meeting finished up," I said, my eyes scanning the room. Ethan emerged from behind the sofa, where he seemed to have been crouching, adjusting his shoe. They both looked guilty, like kids caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "Just talking about some old movies," Ethan said, a nervous laugh escaping him. "Right," I replied, forcing a smile. The air felt thick, charged with something I couldn't name. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my spine. I tried to shake it off. This was Mark, my stable, reliable husband. This was Ethan, my slightly eccentric stepbrother. They were just 2 guys hanging out. There was nothing to see here, nothing at all. But the feeling persisted. It was like a low hum beneath the surface of our lives, a discordant note in the otherwise harmonious tune. I started paying closer attention. Not snooping, not deliberately, but noticing. Noticing how Mark's phone was always face down, noticing how Ethan would leave the room whenever I entered, noticing the way they sometimes finished each other's sentences, a familiarity that felt new. It culminated one evening when Mark was supposedly working late. I was in the kitchen, making dinner, and Ethan was in the living room. I needed something from the garage. As I walked past the living room doorway, I heard Ethan's voice, low and serious. "We can't keep doing this, Mark. Clara's going to figure it out." I froze. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Keep doing what? Figure what out?" I didn't hear Mark's reply. My mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together. What could they be doing? Some kind of secret business deal? A shared hobby I didn't know about. The possibilities tumbled through my head, none of them making sense, yet the dread deepened. I backed away quietly, pretending I hadn't heard. I went to the garage, got what I needed, and returned, trying to appear normal. When I walked back into the living room, they were sitting far apart, scrolling on their phones again. The air was thick with silence. That night, I couldn't sleep. The phrase echoed in my head, "Clara's going to figure it out." Figure out what? The only thing that made any kind of terrifying sense was... No. It couldn't be. Not Mark, not Ethan, not together. The thought was so repellent, so utterly unthinkable, that I pushed it away with all my might. Ethan stayed for another week before finally announcing he'd found a room to rent closer to the city. He seemed eager to leave. Mark seemed relieved, or maybe just back to his normal, slightly distant self. I tried to convince myself that Ethan leaving would make everything go back to normal, would erase the strange tension that had filled our house. For a little while, it did. Mark was home on time again. The house felt quieter, less charged. I started to believe I had imagined the whole thing, that my unease was just stress or a reaction to having a guest. I felt foolish for even entertaining such dark thoughts. Then, 2 weeks after Ethan moved out, I found out I was pregnant. Mark was thrilled, ecstatic even. It wasn't planned, we hadn't been actively trying, though we weren't strictly preventing it either. We'd had discussions about kids, vague timelines. I was in my early 30s, Mark was a few years older. We knew we wanted them eventually. But as Mark hugged me, his face beaming, a cold, hard dread settled in my stomach. 2 months pregnant, the doctor said, roughly 8 weeks. Ethan had been staying with us for exactly 2 months. The timing was a punch to the gut. It was too perfect, too horrifyingly aligned with the period of my growing unease, the hushed conversations, the guilty looks. My mind, which I had desperately tried to convince was paranoid, now presented the evidence in stark, undeniable clarity. Mark, Ethan, together. A baby. I went through the motions, smiling, accepting Mark's congratulations, but inside I was crumbling. The joy I should have felt was suffocated by a wave of nausea and terror that had nothing to do with morning sickness. I looked at Mark, his happy face, and felt a profound sense of disconnect. Was he genuinely happy? Or was he already calculating, already trying to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation? I couldn't talk to anyone. How could I? Tell my friends. Hey, guess what? I think my husband is having an affair with my stepbrother, and I might be pregnant with my stepbrother's baby. The words felt insane, even in my head. My dad? Susan? Impossible. This involved their son. This involved my husband. This involved me, caught in a nightmare of infidelity and twisted family trees. I spent days in a haze of fear and uncertainty. Every time Mark touched my stomach or talked about baby names, I felt a wave of revulsion mixed with gut-wrenching pain. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly. My work suffered. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by the horrifying possibility that was growing inside me. I knew I couldn't live like this. The uncertainty was a poison, slowly destroying me from the inside out. I had to know. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how much damage it caused, I had to face it. One evening, about a week after the pregnancy test, I sat Mark down after dinner. The suburban quiet outside felt like a cruel mockery of the storm brewing inside our house. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling in my lap. "Mark," I started, my voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk. About the baby." He looked at me, his expression open, expectant. "What about the baby, honey?" "I know this is going to sound awful," I said, forcing the words out, "and I'm so sorry for even thinking this. But is this baby yours?" His face changed instantly. The open expression slammed shut, replaced by shock, then disbelief, then a rush of furious red. "What, Clara? What kind of question is that? Of course it's mine. What are you even saying?" He stood up, his voice rising. "How could you even ask me that, after everything?" "Mark, please," I pleaded, holding up a hand. "Just hear me out. Please don't yell." "Don't yell? You're accusing me of what? Of not being the father of our child? That's insane." "It's the timing, Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the tremor running through me. "The doctor said 8 weeks. Ethan was here for 2 months, and I saw things. I heard things. The way you two were acting, I have this horrible feeling." "A horrible feeling," he scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "You're letting some horrible feeling and a coincidence in timing make you think I cheated on you with Ethan, my stepbrother? That's disgusting, Clara. Honestly, I'm appalled. He was good, so good at turning it around, making me feel like the crazy one. But I couldn't back down. Not now." "I need to be sure, Mark," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "For my peace of mind. For the rest of our lives. If there's nothing to worry about, then a paternity test after the baby is born. It would just confirm it. It would clear the air completely." The mention of a paternity test sent him over the edge, his face contorted with rage. "A paternity test? Are you serious? You want to subject me, subject us, to that humiliation because of your wild, baseless suspicions? You're unbelievable, Clara." He was shouting now, his voice echoing in the quiet house. "I can't believe you would even suggest such a thing. This is our baby." His fierce denial, his absolute refusal to even consider the possibility, ironically solidified my suspicions. If he had nothing to hide, why such an extreme reaction? Why not just calmly agree to the test to put my mind at ease? "Your reaction tells me everything, Mark," I said, standing up, my own anger starting to simmer beneath the surface of my pain. "If you can't agree to a simple test, then I don't see how we can move forward. It's an ultimatum. Paternity test, or we're done." He stared at me, his chest heaving. The anger in his eyes warred with something else. Panic. You can't be serious," he stammered. "I am," I said, my voice cold and firm. "I can't live with this doubt." He turned away, running his hands through his hair again. I need time to think," he muttered, his voice flat. That night we slept in separate rooms. The silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. The next few days were a blur of misery. Mark avoided me, coming home late, retreating to his study. If I tried to talk, he'd snap or just ignore me. The tension in the house was suffocating. I felt like I was living with a stranger, or worse, an enemy. I had no idea what he was thinking, what he was planning. Then he disappeared. I woke up one morning, and his side of the bed was empty. His car was gone from the driveway. There was no note texted him, no response. I called, went straight to voicemail. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Was he leaving me? Was he with Ethan? I went to work, but I couldn't focus. The hours dragged by. By lunchtime, I was frantic. I called his office. They said he hadn't come in. He'd taken 2 personal days. My heart pounded. 2 personal days, without telling me? I called his friends, trying to sound casual, asking if they'd heard from him. None of them had. Panic started to set in. Was he okay? Had something happened to him? Or was this just his way of, punishing me? Avoiding the conversation. As a last resort, I called Susan, my stepmother, Ethan's mother. She was usually calm, collected. "Susan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have you heard from Mark or Ethan?" "Clara? No, why?" she asked, her voice immediately tinged with concern. "Mark, he's not home. He didn't come home last night, and he's not answering his phone. He took personal days from work. I'm starting to get worried." Susan's calm facade cracked. "He didn't come home? For 2 days?" Her voice rose in alarm. That's not like Mark at all. I hesitated, then decided I had to tell her something, at least enough to explain my level of distress. "Susan, we had an argument, a bad one, about the baby, and something I suspected. I couldn't bring myself to say the rest." Susan didn't press for details, sensing my distress. "Okay, Clara, don't panic. Let me try calling Ethan. Maybe he's with him, though I can't imagine why." The next half hour was agonizing. I paced the floor, imagining every terrible scenario. Just as I was about to call the police, my phone rang. It was Mark. Mark, where are you? Are you okay? I practically screamed into the phone, relief washing over me, quickly followed by anger. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. I'm fine, Clara. I just needed some space. Some space? Mark, I've been out of my mind with worry. I called your office, your friends, even Susan. Why didn't you just answer your phone or leave a note? You didn't need to involve my mother, he said coldly. I just needed time to think. I'll be back tomorrow morning. He hung up before I could say another word. I stood there, phone in hand, stunned by his callousness. He had put me through hell, and his only concern was that I'd bothered his mother. The relief evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard fury. He returned the next morning, walking in as if he'd just been out for groceries. He looked serene, calm, almost cheerful. Where were you? I asked, my voice tight. Sorting things out, he said, giving me a small, unsettling smile. I braced myself. What kind of sorting out? Was he finally ready to admit the truth, to talk about the paternity test? What he said next was so far beyond anything I could have imagined, it felt like a scene from a horror movie. I've taken care of the problem, Clara, he said, looking directly into my eyes, his voice calm and steady. The pregnancy. It was causing all this stress, all these foolish questions in your head. So I handled it. My blood ran cold. Handled it? What do you mean, handled it? I had an abortion, he said, as if he was announcing he'd picked up dry cleaning. Yesterday, it's done. Now you have no reason to doubt me. We can just move past this. Start fresh. I stared at him, speechless. My mind struggled to process his words. An abortion? He had terminated the pregnancy, without me, without a word. And he was presenting it as a solution? As a gift to save our marriage? You got an abortion? I finally choked out, the words foreign and horrific on my tongue. Yes, he said, still with that unnerving calm. It was the logical thing to do. It removes the source of your suspicion. Now you can stop worrying. We can go back to how things were. My breaking point. This was it. The final, definitive crack in the already shattered foundation of my world. The cold, calculated cruelty of his actions. The utter lack of regard for me. For the life growing inside me, regardless of paternity. For the decision that should have been ours to make. It was monstrous. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, this stranger standing in my living room, wearing my husband's face. My vision blurred. I felt lightheaded, like I might collapse. I need you to leave, I finally managed to whisper, the words raw and shaky. He looked surprised. Leave? Clara, I just fixed everything. You fixed nothing, I shouted, finding my voice, a raw, primal sound. You are a monster, Mark! Get out of my house! He started to protest, to argue, but something in my face, in my voice, stopped him. I didn't wait. I turned and walked out the front door, leaving him standing there amidst the wreckage he had created. I drove aimlessly for a while, tears streaming down my face, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. He had not only cheated, not only lied, not only gaslighted me, but he had also taken away my choice, my body autonomy, the potential life growing inside me, and presented it as a favor. It was beyond comprehension. My first call was to a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague. My voice shaking, I explained the bare facts: infidelity, pregnancy by another man, my stepbrother, I choked out, and his unilateral decision to terminate the pregnancy without my knowledge or consent, framing it as a solution. The attorney listened patiently, her voice calm and professional. She told me to secure any evidence I had, the positive pregnancy test, any doctor's notes from initial appointments, any texts or emails. My second call was to Ethan. I found his number through Susan's contact list. He answered hesitantly. Ethan, I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. It's Clara. A pause. Clara, hey, what's up? He sounded nervous. Don't play dumb, Ethan, I said, a cold fury hardening my voice. I know about you and Mark, and I know about the baby, and I know what Mark did. Silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Finally a quiet, almost inaudible whisper. Clara, I'm so sorry. That was all I needed. The apology felt hollow, meaningless, but it was a confirmation that the nightmare was real. Yeah, I said, the word heavy with exhaustion. You should be. I hung up. I checked into a hotel, the sterile room a stark contrast to the emotional chaos raging inside me. I couldn't go back to that house. Not yet. Not while he was there. The next morning, fueled by a fragile sense of resolve and a deep-seated need for justice, I met with the attorney. I laid out everything. The affair, the pregnancy, the timing, the confrontations, his disappearance, the shocking abortion reveal. I had the positive pregnancy test tucked away, and I knew I could get the doctor's notes from my first appointment. My attorney was sharp, compassionate but firm. She explained the legal process. While Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state, infidelity and egregious conduct can impact asset division and alimony, especially if one party is clearly at fault and has independent means. Mark had a good job. I had a good job. Alimony might be a fight, but his actions, particularly the abortion without my consent and the admitted infidelity, would work strongly against him. My goal wasn't to ruin him financially, but to protect myself and ensure he couldn't claim any right to my assets or demand support. We need to move quickly, she advised, before he tries to hide assets or make things difficult. I spent the rest of the day steeling myself. I had to go back to the house. I had to get him out. I drove back to the suburban street that no longer felt like home. His car was in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the front door and walked in. He was sitting on the sofa, scrolling on his phone, looking perfectly at ease. Seeing him there in my space, after what he had done, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "Clara," he said, looking up, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "We need to talk. You can't just run off like that." "We have nothing to talk about, Mark," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I've spoken to an attorney. I'm divorcing you." His jaw dropped. "Divorcing me, Clara? Don't be ridiculous. I told you the problem is solved. We can move past this." "There is no moving past this, Mark," I said, walking towards the stairs. "You cheated on me with my stepbrother, you lied to my face, and you decided on your own to terminate a pregnancy that involved me. You are a stranger to me. I want you out, now." "Out!" he sputtered, standing up. "This is my house too." "No, Mark," I said, turning to face him, my eyes hard. "I owned this house before we got married. It's my house, and I want you gone." I went upstairs and started packing his things. I grabbed suitcases from the closet and began filling them with his clothes, toiletries, anything that was clearly his. He followed me, yelling, arguing, threatening. I ignored him, my movements precise and mechanical. There was a strange calm that had settled over me, a cold determination. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by the need to act, to protect myself, to remove him from my life. I dragged the packed suitcases to the front hall. "Get out, Mark," I said, pointing to the door. "Take your things and leave. My lawyer will be in touch." He stood there for a moment, looking stunned, then enraged. He swore, grabbed the suitcases, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I called a locksmith. I had the locks changed on every door and window. It felt like a physical severing, a final act of defiance and self-preservation. With the new locks in place, the house finally felt like mine again, though the air still felt heavy with the ghosts of betrayal. I packed a small overnight bag for myself and returned to the hotel. I couldn't bear to sleep in the house, not tonight, not yet. My phone started ringing almost immediately. Mark. Call after call, text after text. Angry messages, pleading messages, threats. I ignored them all. I had nothing left to say to him. He had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences. Then, a text from Ethan. "Clara, Mark just called me. He said you know. He's freaking out. I told him I'm sorry. What are you going to do?" I didn't reply. His apology, like Mark's, meant nothing. They had destroyed my life. Their apologies were hollow echoes in the vast emptiness they had created. I sat in the hotel room, the silence broken only by the distant hum of city traffic, and thought about my next move. The divorce was started. Mark was out of the house. But there was one more thing I felt compelled to do. Something that felt petty, maybe, but also necessary. My step-parents, Robert and Susan. They deserved to know, not just about Mark, but about Ethan. This involved their son, their family. And Susan in particular valued appearances, valued family honor. I knew this would devastate them, but I also knew it would have a profound impact on Ethan, perhaps the only consequence he would truly feel. I called Susan the next morning. My voice was calmer now, steady. "Susan," I said, "I need to talk to you and Dad. It's important, about Mark and Ethan." There was a pause. "Clara, is everything all right? Mark called me yesterday. He was very upset, said you were being unreasonable." "Everything is not all right, Susan," I said, my voice firm. Mark and I are getting a divorce, and you need to know why. I told her everything, slowly, calmly. The growing suspicions, the discovery of the affair between Mark and Ethan, the pregnancy, the timing that pointed to Ethan, my confrontation with Mark, his denial, his disappearance, and finally his cold, clinical revelation about the abortion. Susan listened in stunned silence. I could hear Robert in the background, asking questions, his voice rising in disbelief. When I finished, the silence on the line stretched for a long moment. "Clara," Susan said, her voice thin, trembling with shock and anger. Are you sure about this? Ethan and Mark?" "I'm sure, Susan," I said. "Ethan admitted it to me yesterday, and I have proof of the pregnancy, doctor's notes from the first appointment." "The pregnancy," she whispered, the full weight of it hitting her. "Her son and my husband, betraying me together, and a baby." "And Mark, he just ended it?" Robert's voice, tight with fury, came through the phone. "Yes," I confirmed. "Without telling me, he said it was to fix things." Susan let out a choked sob. "I can't believe this, Ethan." "I'm divorcing Mark," I reiterated, "and I needed you to know the truth about both of them." The call ended shortly after, a swirl of shock, anger, and apologies from Robert. I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. I had dropped a bomb on their family, but it was the truth, and they deserved to know what their son had done. Predictably, my phone started blowing up again. Mark, furious, screaming messages, accusing me of ruining his life, of being cruel, vindictive. He said I had no right to tell his mother to involve them. I ignored his calls for a while, letting him rage. When I finally answered, his voice was hoarse with fury. "You bitch," he screamed. "You told them. You ruined everything." "You ruined everything, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "Not me. Your choices led to this." "My mother is... she's cutting Ethan off," he yelled, desperation creeping into his voice. "Because of you. He has nowhere to go. She's saying he's not her son anymore. She said she's changing her will." The disinheritance. It was happening. The severe consequence from the original story, but aimed at Ethan, not the cheating spouse. It was Susan, Ethan's mother, delivering the blow. "That's between Ethan and his mother," I said, my voice cold. "It has nothing to do with me. You should have thought about the consequences before you chose to cheat with him." "You are so petty, Clara," he shrieked. "So cruel. You've destroyed my life, his life, our families. I have nothing left because of you." "You have nothing left because of your own actions, Mark," I said, the weariness settling deep in my bones. "Don't call me again. All communication goes through my lawyer now." I hung up. He continued to text for a while, threats and insults, but eventually they stopped. Later that day, my father, Robert, called me. He sounded heartbroken but firm. "Clara," he said gently, "I'm so sorry. About Mark and about Ethan. I can't believe this happened." "It's okay, Dad," I said, my voice soft. She's devastated," he continued. "She's furious with Ethan. She meant what she said, Clara, about cutting him off. He's caused so much trouble over the years, but this is unforgivable, bringing this kind of shame and pain on you, on the family." He asked about the proof of the pregnancy, the doctor's notes. I promised to send them to him. He needed to see it, to fully grasp the reality of what his stepson had done. He assured me they were on my side, that they would support me through the divorce. Knowing I had their support, especially my father's, was a small comfort in the wreckage. The divorce process was long and draining, just as my lawyer had predicted. Mark fought me initially, trying to claim a share of my assets, even hinting at alimony, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. His lawyer, a sharp woman who seemed weary of his antics, eventually advised him to settle. We had the pregnancy test, the doctor's notes, and crucially, Ethan's reluctant testimony. Susan had indeed cut Ethan off, and whether out of genuine remorse or pressure from his mother, or perhaps my father using his financial leverage over Ethan, he agreed to testify to the affair under oath. Having the affair confirmed by both parties, especially Ethan admitting to being the other man with my husband, left Mark with very little ground to stand on. The depositions were brutal. Sitting across from Mark, hearing him lie and squirm under questioning, then hearing Ethan, pale and nervous, confirm the sordid details, it was like reliving the nightmare again and again. But it was necessary. It built an undeniable case. We finally reached a settlement. It was fair. I kept the house, my savings, my investments. Mark walked away with significantly less than he'd hoped for, Certainly no alimony. It wasn't about the money for me, not really. It was about justice, about not letting him profit from his betrayal. It was about reclaiming my life and my financial independence. Signing the papers felt anticlimactic, not a moment of triumph, but one of profound weariness. It was over. The marriage, the conflict, the legal battle. Done. In the months that followed, I slowly started to rebuild. The house felt empty at first, but I started redecorating, making it truly mine again. I focused on my work, reconnected with friends, started going to a therapist to process the trauma. The pain didn't disappear overnight, but it became less sharp, less all-consuming. I learned to live with the scar. I didn't hear from Mark or Ethan. My father occasionally mentioned Ethan. He was struggling, cut off by Susan, drifting again. My father's disappointment in him was palpable. Susan remained firm in her decision. The disinheritance wasn't just financial. It was a complete severing of ties. Then, about 8 months after the divorce was finalized, my father